So today we're going to learn how to create a button that you can press in order to open things inside your game. This is something that was requested by one of my viewers, so this is something that we're going to be doing. I just want to add something before we get into the video, which is that this could be anything. Like right now I made something where it's a switch on the ground that you can jump on, but this could really be anything. This could be a switch on a wall somewhere where when your character walks up to you and then you press E on the keyboard, then it opens the door. Like you can change this in any kind of way you want to. But essentially, I'm just showing you a couple of scripts that actually allow for a door to open and allow for you to interact with something in order to open that door. So with that, let's actually get started on this video here. So basically, I have an example here of what the finished thing is going to be after we're done with this tutorial here. So just to kind of show you, if we were to play this game, you can see that I have a character that has a player controller, so we can actually make him move around and jump and do all those sorts of things. But when I press the open button, you can see that we open a platform. We can't close it again using the open button, at least not as it is right now. So if I were to go over and press the close button, then it closes the platform. And again, this one just closes it. What you can do with what we're going to build today, because I decided to make this a little bit more modular so you can, change things yourself if you want to, is you can actually go in and you can actually go into the script that I attached to my game object to one of these switches here. And I can say, you know what, let's go ahead and allow for this particular switch here to be both a door opener, but also a door closer. So I can tick this on so we can actually open the door as well. So going inside the game, you can see that now we can both close and open the door with that switch there. So, we can make this modular to make it do different things so you can decide what you want it to do inside your game. And of course, I do have another version of this project that doesn't have everything created already, so we can actually follow each other from the start. So basically what I have here is I have a very simple player character inside my scene. As you can see, we have this little capsule player that we can move around using a player controller. The only thing that I've created so far using actual scripting is a player controller. So you can actually see that if I were to go in here and actually show you, it's just a very basic player controller where we can go in. You have the rigid body of the player. We can move it using, the A and D and the arrow keys and all that sort of thing. It's very typical player controller. It's a very simple version of it, and I do have plenty of tutorials that shows how to create a player controller. We're not going to be programming the player controller in this video, of course, because this is not a player controller tutorial. This is a how to open switches, so you probably already have a player that can move around. So going inside the game here, you can see that I have a basic platform. I just basically gave the ground a color, and I also gave it a box collider so we don't pass through it. I did also go in and add a door, which is just a basic square sprite that I added in, of course, just by right clicking to the object, sprites, and then square. And I colored it red and gave it a box collider so we can't pass through it because it's supposed to keep us out, right? And then of course I did create a switch, and you basically just do that by right clicking, create empty, and then I created a empty game object. I just renamed it to door open, because you could also call it switch or something. And then I went in and included a base, which is also just a square sprite, which is going to be just the base, the bottom of the switch. This is optional. This is just me creating something I think looks like a switch inside my game. And then of course I did also create a red switch that is the actual button that you jump on, and then it goes down because you press it. And lastly, I did decide that I did also want to create a open tag. Of course, this is optional. You can just not have one, just, so you just have the switch without the text in front of it. But basically, the only thing here that's really worth noting that isn't just creating basic shapes is that inside my switch, I did actually add more than just a box collider. I did also create a box collider that had a trigger on top of it. Just to show you, if I were to toggle off the trigger, so not the regular box collider, but the actual trigger, you can see that we have the object actually passing down through the ground, which is a design decision that I decided on my switch here. So you can actually see if we were to pull it up from the ground, you can see, it's actually halfway passing through the ground down there, just so we have a little bit of wiggly room to make sure the button doesn't, kind of like hover on top of the ground. It doesn't really matter. It's just a design decision on my part here. So with that, you can see that when we add a trigger, which is just by adding another box collider, because you can actually, if you didn't know, add multiple box colliders to one object. So by actually adding a second box collider, 2D, I can actually toggle this on, and you can see we have a trigger. You can see that normally the trigger would actually be inside the box itself. This is how it does look like by default, but because I decided to just move it up a little bit on the y-axis, we actually have a trigger that goes a little bit above the actual box, so we can actually check when the player jumps on top of the box, because the player goes into the trigger if the player is actually supposed to be pressing the button. So by adding a trigger, we can do that. Of course, there's many ways to do this. You could probably add physics to the button, so when the player jumps on top of it, it has a rigid body that makes it go up and down and stuff like that. But I usually try to avoid using physics unless I really need to, like on a player or something. So what we're gonna do is I'm gonna go inside my scripts folder. I'm gonna right click, create a new script, and I'm going to call this one SwitchBehaviour. I'm also going to go ahead and add a second script that is going to be called DoorBehaviour, just so we have the door behaving in some sort of way as well. What is going on here? It's loading something. So now we have two scripts inside our game, and the basic idea here is that we're going to add one script to the door that just basically takes care of opening and closing the door, just so we have a very basic function in there. And then we're going to have a script that goes on top of the actual switch, the one that we jump upon to make the switch go down, and then something happens. And what you can do in the way that I decided that we're going to do it in this video here is that you can actually assign a door to the switches that you add the script upon. So you can actually copy paste the switch multiple times, and then you just drag and drop the door from inside your hierarchy, and then you have a reference to the door you want to actually interact with on that particular switch. So it's very cool and fancy, and you can actually toggle on if it should allow for the door to open or just to close or whatever. So what we're going to do is I'm going to open up the DoorBehaviour scripts, and we're just going to go and get started here. First, we need to actually check if the door is already open. So we're going to do a Boolean, and we're just going to go ahead and call it is door open. And we're going to go ahead and start this out by saying the door is not open. We're also going to go ahead and make two vector3 fields that are going to just have the position of the door when it's closed and when it's open. So we can actually swap back and forth between those two positions. And this gets calculated automatically once you start up the game, at least in the way that we're going to set it up here. So I'm going to go in, we're going to create a vector3 data type. And I'm going to call this one door closed pos for position. Then I'm going to copy paste it. I'm going to create one called door open pos. And lastly, we're going to add in a door opening speed so we can decide how fast we want the door to actually open and close, since this would be a nice thing to change as well. So we're going to create a float. I'm going to call this one door speed. And then I'm just going to go ahead and set it to something like 10. So these are basically all the fields that we need in order to get the door working, but we do need to do one more thing, which is that in order to actually have the switches open the door, we need to have the isDoorOpen Boolean accessible from other scripts, which means that we do actually need to set this one to a public. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to actually assign some data to our vector3s up here. So we're going to not have a start method, but we're going to have a await method. And then inside here, we're going to take the door closed position, and I'm just going to assign it to transform.position, just so we can grab the current position of the door as it is right now as we start the game, because it's going to be closed once we start the game up. Next, we're also going to assign the door open position, so we're going to go below here. And this time we do actually need to go in and say we want to create a new vector3, because we actually want to change the position of the door into a new position. We're going to go in, and I'm just going to say we want to grab the transform dot position dot x for the x-axis. Then I'm going to change the y-axis by saying that we want to do the exact same thing, but we're just going to say y instead. And then I'm going to do the same thing for the z-axis. Now we do want to change the y-axis here though, so depending on how I want the door to open or close, this is how we're going to go ahead and change it. In my example here, I'm just going to go ahead and add 3f to it, so 3 floats. So we're just going to move it upwards on the y-axis 3 units inside Unity. And now basically inside our update method, we can just go ahead and say, well, okay, if the Boolean that we have at the very top is set to true, then we're going to have the door open, or if it's set to false, then we're going to have it closed. So inside of here, we're going to create an if statement, and I'm going to go ahead and say that we have, first of all, our isDoorOpen, and if that one is true, then of course the door is going to be open. And I would like to run a open door method that we haven't created yet, but we will in just a second. That is just going to take care of transitioning the door from closed to open position. Then I want to do an else if statement. Else if the door is not open, so we're going to take the isDoorOpen and we're going to set it to false. Then we want to run a close door method. And now we just basically need to create these two methods here, and then everything is working on the door. So we can just go down here and we just go ahead and copy paste. So we have open door. This is actually going to be a void type because it's not going to return any kind of value. And the first thing I'm going to do in here is I'm actually going to do something that is going to make it more resource friendly inside our game. It's just a little optimization move where basically I want to check if the door is already in the opening position. Because if it is that, then we don't want to continuously update the position of the door because there's no need to, and it's just going to hog up resources. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and create an if statement, which again is optional but recommended. And inside the if statement, I just basically want to check if the current transform dot position is equal or actually is not equal to the door open position. So we're just going to copy paste that in. So the next thing we want to do is we actually want to move it. So we're going to go ahead and create a transform dot position, which is we're grabbing the current position of the door. And we want to set it equal to something new. In this case here, since we're not using a rigid body, we want to use a transform method. So we're going to say we want to add a vector3 dot move towards, which is a method we have inside our transform moving methods we have inside Unity. And what we need to do inside this method here is just basically tell it where is the door right now, where do we want to move it to, and how fast do we want it to move. So we can actually update it smoothly over time. So to begin with, we're going to go ahead and say that we have transform dot position, because that is the current location of the door, which is where it is right now. Then I want to go in and say, where do I want to move it to, which is going to be the door open position. And then I want to say, okay, how fast do I want it to actually move? And wouldn't you know, we already created a door speed up here. So we're just going to go ahead and take that one. So I'm just going to paste it in. And then we do, of course, also want to multiply by time dot delta time, because otherwise it's going to be frame rate based, and that is just going to be way too fast. Just a reminder here, if you don't know what time dot delta time actually specifically does, then I do have a video that explains what it does, and I will link that in the description if you're interested in seeing that. For now, we're just going to go ahead and say that now we have a open door method here. This is basically all we got to do. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy paste this entire method. I'm just going to paste it below and say close door. And now we don't want to check if it's equal to door open position, but this time if it's equal to or not equal to the door closed position. Then we want to go in here and we want to take it from the current position. And I want to move it towards the door closed position that we actually stated inside our vector3 field at the very top there. Then we have the door speed, which is the same. And then we're just going to go ahead and save it. And this is all we need to have in order to actually get this working inside our game. So with that, we are now going to be adding a little bit of chasing to our switch behavior so we can actually get that one working. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to add the fields. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a field where we can actually drag and drop the door that we want the switch to interact with into this particular script here, so it knows what to interact with inside our game. So what I can do is I can create, first of all, a serialize field, so we can actually drag and drop it. And then I want to create a door behavior data type, which basically means that this is going to be a script data type that is going to reference that script that we're dragging into the serialized field. And then we're going to call it something, and we're just going to go and give it the same name here, just so we know what it is. So now if I were to go back inside Unity just to show it and actually add my script onto my game objects, because we haven't done that yet. If I were to go inside my door, I can add my door behavior to it. So we have it down here at the bottom. You can see it's right there. And we do have the option to actually allow for it to be open at the start if we want to do that. But if I were to go inside my switch, which is the red button that we have inside our entire switch game object, with the hierarchy, we have a bunch of stuff in here. I can actually go ahead and add the switch behavior to that switch. And at the bottom here, you can see that we need to pass in the door that we want to actually open. So I can take my door and just drag it in there. And then it's going to grab the script from the door, because remember, we are not going in and grabbing a game object, but we're actually grabbing the script from that game object inside this field here. Next, I do want to add in some functionality. So we're going to serialize field again. And basically, I just want to be able to allow for people to very easily inside the inspector. Actually, let me just go ahead and do that. And basically, I just want to make it very easy for people inside the inspector at the beginning to determine if this is going to be a switch that allows you to open the door or close the door, or both of them if you want to do that. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a Boolean, and I'm going to call this one is door open switch. Is door open switch. Just so we know exactly what kind of switch this is. Then I'm going to duplicate it, and then I'm going to just call this one is door close switch. Then below here, we're going to add the rest of the fields. And because I decided to take my button that I need to press and actually have it halfway into the ground, I do need to figure out what the halfway point, like what is half the size of my button, so I know how much it needs to be pressed down when I actually interact with it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a field here. I'm just going to create a float, and this one is going to be called switch size Y. And this is going to contain half the size of my button, so I know that it only needs to go halfway down, because otherwise it's going to go way on the ground when it actually gets pushed down. And then just like with the door, I do also want to get a vector 3 for the starting position of the switch to the ending position, so I know, which two points I want to move it back and forward from. So I'm going to create a vector 3, and I'm going to call this one switch up position, and then I'm going to duplicate it, and then I'm going to call this one switch down. I do also want to add a speed, just like with the door, so we know which speed we want the switch to be pressed at. So I'm going to say we have a float, and I'm going to call this one switch speed. The next field we're going to add is going to solve a issue that we're going to run into, which is basically that when the player stands right at the edge of the switch, the little red button there, the button is going to like flicker up and down. So what I want to do here is I want to add just a teeny tiny delay for the button to go back up again before we actually allow for ourselves to actually click the button again, just so we don't get that vibration going on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a float, which is going to be a time that is going to delay the switch from going up again. And I'm just going to go ahead and call this one switch delay. Now we do also need to assign some data to these two. So we're going to say the first one is going to be 1F, just so we have a very fast speed, because we don't want it to be too slow. And then I also want to add a delay that is going to be 0.2F. And then the last thing we're going to add is going to be a Boolean that checks whether or not the switch has already been pressed. So we're going to add a Boolean. I'm going to call this one is pressing switch. And we're just going to go ahead and set it equal to false, because once we start the game, of course, we're not going to have the switch pressed yet. Next, I'm going to go inside my awake method, which right now is set to start. So we're just going to change it to awake. And we're going to assign some of these data. So the first one here, where we actually get the switch size, we're actually going to get the half size of the button, so we don't press it too far down. So I'm going to take this one, and I'm going to go ahead and set it equal to the game object. Actually, we can just say, because we don't need to write game object in front of it, transform dot local scale dot y. So we get the scaling of the y-axis. And then I just want to divide it by 2. Because by dividing it by 2, we now have the half size of the height of this particular switch here. So with that, we can now go down a couple of lines, and then we do the exact same thing as we did with the door. We need to get the open position and the closing position of the switch, or actually we want to get the up position and the down position. So we're going to actually just copy paste what we have in here. So we're going to go back to the door behavior, because why do things again when we do already have it? We're just basically going to copy paste what we have inside the awake. And we're just going to go ahead and paste it inside our SwitchBehaviour script here. So instead of the door close position, we actually want to have switch up position, because that is going to be the starting position. And then we do also want to change it from door open position to switch down position. And then basically we just want to go in here and we want to say the exact same thing. We want to get the position of the X and the Y and the Z, but we do want to make a change. Instead of adding 3, we actually want to say minus the switch size that we just calculated, because then we know how much it needs to go down once the player actually presses it. Then I'm going to go back inside my door behavior, going to go down to update, and I'm just going to copy paste everything we have, because a lot of this is doing things again and again. So inside my update method, inside my switch behavior, I'm just going to paste it in, and I'm going to change some names. So instead of is door open, we're going to say is pressing switch. We're just going to paste that in here. And then we want to create a method not called open door, but instead called move switch down. And then we want to add one in that is called move switch up. And then of course the next step here is actually creating the method so we can actually move the switch up and down. So below here, I'm just going to go ahead and actually create this method. So we're going to say void move switch down. I'm going to open it up here. And just like before, we're going to go back inside our door open script, and I'm just going to copy paste the if statement because it's essentially going to be the exact same thing. We want to make sure we do this little check here for performance. And then of course we do want to change it so it doesn't say door open position. So we're going to go up, and instead we want to check if the button has been pressed down, because we do want to press this button down. And once it hits the bottom position, we don't want to continuously update the position of it because it's already there. And we do, of course, also want to go inside our move towards method here because we don't want to go towards door open position, but instead we want to go towards the switch down position. And then we want to do it by using the switch speed and not the door speed. So we can actually say switch speed, which is another field we have at the very top there. And just like before, we copy paste it. So we have two of them, and then we're just going to go ahead and change the name of the method so it's switch up. And then we're going to go in and say it's not the switch down position, but the switch up position that we're checking with. So we're just going to copy paste that down here because we want to do it both places. Now, of course, right now, if we were to go in and play this, it's not going to work yet because we did have a trigger on top of the button that actually starts this whole process of pressing the button and actually, you know, allowing it for not to be pressed anymore. So we do actually need to go down below. And we want to add a on trigger enter to D, so we can actually make sure that once we do actually enter this button, which means that we jump on top of the button, then we do something. So first I want to check if my collision is going to be equal to a particular tag. So if my player with the player tag jumps on top of this switch, which by the way, we do need to fix right now. So by going back inside Unity, we do want to make sure that our player does actually have a tag on top of it. So you can go up here and tag it with player. Otherwise, this is not going to work. And going back inside our scripts, we want to make sure that we go inside the if statement. And basically, we just want to check if the collision dot compare tag is equal to player. Now, the compare tag is actually something that a viewer pointed out to me that I wasn't using, because you could also go in and say game object dot tag is equal to player. Like this would also work. You could do this as well, but the compare tag is seen as being more optimized. It's not really going to matter when it's inside a trigger because it's just going to run, you know, sometimes it's not going to run inside an update method, for example, constantly. So the performance hit is not really going to matter in this case here, but if you want to do it the more optimized way, then compare tag is the way to do it. So right now we're basically saying that the player is actually jumping on top of the button, so things need to happen. So the first thing we need to do is actually to go up here and say, is pressing switch equal to false? We actually need to change that because now we are in fact pressing it, so it's going to be true instead. So we want to go inside our if statement, paste that in. I'm going to set it equal to the opposite of itself, just so we change it from false to true or true to false. So it just goes back and forth each time we actually run this on trigger events. And as you might have seen, inside the update method, we're actually checking if this one is true or false. So it's very important that we're actually swapping between true and false when we actually press this switch here. Next, we're going to do something that has something to do with the fact that I wanted to make this modular, because right now, as you may have noticed, we did actually add in 2 serialized fields where you could toggle inside the inspector whether or not you wanted this to be a modular, like should this particular switch open or close the door or both. And because we have this included inside this example here, we do actually need to run a couple of if statements. So I'm going to create an if statement, and I'm first of all going to check if we do actually have open switch set equal to true, because if it's equal to true, it means that I've allowed this particular switch that this script is attached to open the door. And then I also want to check if the door is already open, because if it's already open, then it shouldn't do anything, right? So I'm actually going to grab the script from my door. So I'm going to say DoorBehaviour dot, and then I want to check for is door open, because we set that one as public inside at the very top here. So this is the one we're checking for. If this is equal to true, if this is equal to false. If this one is equal to false, it means that the door is currently closed. And if we're allowing this switch here to open the door, then we do actually want to open the door using the switch. So going inside the if statement, we're just basically going to say that we want to grab the door behavior, is door open. And because this is a Boolean, we can just go ahead and swap it in exactly the same way as we did up here. So we're going to say it's equal to the opposite of itself, like so. And then I'm going to copy paste and run a else if statement. So we're going to go below here, else if. And then we're just going to change it from is door open to is door close switch. So we're checking if this is meant to close the door. And then we also want to check if the door is already open. And we don't need to change anything inside the else if statement because we're just swapping it around. So if it's true, then it's going to be false. If it's false, then it's going to be true, essentially. The next thing we're going to do is we're actually going to create a onTrigger exit 2D because we want to make sure that we don't get that little jitter effect that I talked about when we stand at the edge of the actual switch, you know, so when it goes back up again, it doesn't start flickering. So what I want to do is I want to create a onTrigger exit 2D. And inside of here, I want to create an if statement that again goes in and actually check if we are currently being, you know, interacted or exited by the player. Then we want to add a delay that is going to delay when the switch is going to pop back up again. I'm going to start a coroutine. So I'm going to say start coroutine. And then I want to run a coroutine that we haven't actually created yet, which is how we create delays inside games. So before we add it in here, I'm just going to go below and actually create the coroutine. The way we do that is by saying IE numerator. And then we want to give it a name. So we're going to call this one switch up delay. Just to give it some kind of name. Then I do also want to pass in the time that we want to delay it. So we're going to say wait time. And then we're going to tell it how much we want to delay it before it actually goes up again. So we're going to say yield, return, new, wait 4 seconds. Then we're going to paste in the wait time. And then we actually want this switch to do something after we delayed it for a little while. And in this case, we just want to make sure that the is pressing switch is actually set equal to false after waiting that time, because once it's equal to false inside our update method, it's actually going to start running our move switch up method. Bess is sitting next to me making noises. We do need to do one more thing though, because we have a coroutine at the bottom here that isn't actually running a coroutine. So we need to take the actual coroutine we created down here. We're going to pass it in, and then we want to add in the delay. So we say is switch delay, just so we have the actual delay pasted in here. So we wait for 0.2 seconds before it actually does anything. So with that, we now have everything we need in order to get this working. So going inside, if I were to go inside my game here, you can see that if I were to actually play it, it should be working, hopefully. So by moving the player, we can now press it. And right now it's actually not doing anything. And that's because we need to go inside the switch, go down to the bottom where we have the script, and we need to tell it, okay, so should this be a door open or close switch, or maybe both? So I can actually go in and toggle them both on, just so we have both of them actually working. So by playing the game again, we can now check if this is working. So by jumping, you can see it opens and then it closes. So we basically have something going on there. And of course, the text isn't quite fitting right now because it does both, essentially. What you can also do, just to show you, is you can actually take this door switch that you have here, you can duplicate it, and then you can move it out just a little bit. So now we have one that's over here on the other side here. I could also change the text here. So we say, instead of it saying open, I can just say close or interact or something. Then I can actually go ahead and go inside our switch, say this one should only work as a closing switch, and then the other one should only work as a open switch. Then I can actually go and play this again, just to, again, test this out. We can jump, we can open it, but we can't close it now because we told it not to. But if I go over here, we can see we can now close it, but this one is not working as an opening switch. So basically this is working like intended. And we now have a way for us to open and close doors inside games when you actually interact with it. Do keep in mind, this can be anything. This can be a switch on a wall or something that you can interact with in order to open doors. You know, it's going to be the exact same thing. So with that, we now have something that works. And I hope this was something that was easy to follow along on and the logic makes sense to you. So you could actually change it up to anything that you want to change it up to. These videos are really just kind of like guidelines, you know, it shows you something quick and then you can just change it yourself if you want to add features to it or something. So with that, I hope you enjoyed and I'll see you guys next time.